welcome to White Line Fever Live. And you know what all the people on YouTube do? They point at the bottom of the screen and they say like and subscribe. And if you are listening on the podcast, welcome back. And we've got an amazing guest. He's heading to Australia in very soon, very, very soon. Maybe when I go to Las Vegas, he's going to Australia. From Slaughter, Dana Strum. Dana, how are you?
I'm doing wonderfully. And yes, live from Las Vegas before the Super Bowl. I am here.
You are. Are you going to the Super Bowl?
No, because we actually Slaughter flies tomorrow to Albuquerque, New Mexico. And then we play a private date in El Paso. We end up in Los Angeles the day before because I couldn't get the band back to Vegas for the day because of the Super Bowl.
Mm.
Because you can't get in and I couldn't buy rooms. So we are parking in Los Angeles for 3/4 of a day before we get on the big spaceship out to Sydney and then Melbourne.
Fantastic. Now, it's the band's first time in Australia. Is it your first time or?
It's the I was in New Zealand on a stopover with Vince Neil from Motley Crue, and we both went there because we were en route to Singapore. And Vince actually said, look at the route. If we go through New Zealand or Australia, and then, of course, I learned you needed a visa to go in, and I couldn't get it on such short notice with Vince's history.
Mm.
And so we went to New Zealand because you didn't have to have it at that time. And we were there, and it was lovely. It was wonderful. But so I've not been to Australia, and the band has not been to Australia, and I'm excited about going.
It's just incredible at this stage of your careers that you're still going to new places, isn't it? I heard an interview on the way back. I just told you before we started recording, I had a very long drive before doing this interview, and I got on Spotify, I searched your name, and I just listened to everything. And you were in Peru, and there was a coup. Was that
There
last
sure
year?
was.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There sure. And we got a call in the morning. Hey, everything's canceled. Pretty much run for your life. And I asked originally, what are the chances of any unrest or anything wild going on? Oh, that doesn't really happen. I said, well, it looks to me like it happens all the time. And and I'm like, but wait a minute, why does it have to cancel? This all just started. And oh, it'll get crazy here. And in the end, I said, well, leave the gear and everything up, and maybe it will resolve. And it can be a celebration because the shit didn't hit the fan, you know. And it's amazing how quick people are to just say doom and gloom and all hell's going to break loose. But the thing did play, and it was great fun, and people were celebrating and dancing in the streets, and yeah, but it was crazy.
We're really hoping that there's no coup when you're in Australia. That would be very unfortunate. Really should pin you down on the lineup because I know Jeff Blando's hasn't been playing with the band, and you've had a couple of different drummers recently. Is that in the last few years? Who's the lineup for this?
Blando plays in the band. He's played in the
Mm.
band. Jeff Blando, the guitar player, has played in the band since Tim Kelly died.
Okay.
Tim Kelly died of a horrific car and semi truck crash head on in Arizona, and it was just
Mm.
god awful. And you never believe that's going to happen when you have early success like that. And then when you're burying your band member, it's not exactly anything you could plan or ever think of. And then Jordan Kanata is the drummer. He was from a
Okay.
group called Adrenaline Mob.
Yep.
Uh, unbelievable, fantastic. And Adrenaline Mob was also in a horrific car crash with their tour bus and a couple of vehicles, and a semi went actually through the vehicle.
Mm.
Jordan was thrown into an alligator and crocodile swamp area. The only reason he lived was because there was a fire from the explosion. And the law enforcement told him, the only reason you're alive is they're scared of the fire. Or
Mm.
believe me, you would have been food.
Mm.
And just a
Wow.
fantastic drummer. Bloss, we still talk to Bloss, the original drummer. He's in Trans-Siberian Orchestra, and he plays in Vegas also with Blue Man Group and in the Rock Vault. But Slaughter works a lot in the U.S., Mexico, Canada, Japan, etc. And the schedule's always kind of conflicted, but Jordan is an incredible addition. People will flip. I mean, people flip every day in the U.S. and they've known the band for a long time. People have flipped.
Now, I was going to ask you about, the new music, and which I'm sure people do ask you about that all the time, and it's an interesting conversation at the moment as to whether that's a worthwhile thing to do. And this documentary I've been reading about, which must be close to being released. So there may be questions you expected a bit later, but I might as well ask them now. So yeah.
No, no, that's all right, and I appreciate them. The biopic doc is really different with Slaughter because we recorded, wrote, produced everything ourselves. Now, many of these other acts had a Mutt Lange involved. Many of them had other known producers involved. We didn't. My background came from the studio. I lived on the floor of a studio. That's how I got my start. Um, and I started wrapping cables and cleaning toilets and serving coffee. And because I had no money, all I could do in the nights, because I lived there, was work on music and mix. And I got better and better at it by working at it. And it was just by dumbass default that I had the ability to work on great gear. So the biopic is really a different story because we were so hands-on and involved. And the other part of it is, of course, we had tragedy, which was the death of a guy right in the middle of things exploding. The guitar player dies. But we pull out all the stops with the various and sundry people that try to break up these bands, and the greed, the lies, the garbage that goes on. And I think it's going to make for a really interesting piece that many people that say wouldn't live in the U.S. would be like, you got to fucking be kidding me. And these guys are still either alive or even looking at each other to do this. And the answer is we've all probably never gotten along more because the truth can hurt and the truth can heal. And I think it's done both. But we're all in a great place right now.
So, can you tell us any release information on the documentary? Where we might be able to see it, when we might be able to see it?
We are in the process of working with two major companies that you guys would know well that I don't want to say because they both shouldn't know that. Uh, but they both have crazy interest in it. And one of them wants it tailored a little bit to them. And we've said we want it to be honest and real. And that may call the cards because the real story is really true. And for people that are listening that their parents either encourage them to play music or to do a podcast or to pursue their dreams, whatever they may be. Mark Slaughter's father was really the one that I spoke to. And he has a great role in this thing because, in the end, if Mark's dad didn't love his kid and encourage his kid, I would have never met Mark. I actually spoke to the dad just playing around and joking around before his dad ever admitted to me, I want you to come see my son. You may be a guy that could just bring my son, and squeeze him through this. And so it was really a story of this guy loving his son. Um, and he appears in and out of the thing because he got to see his kid go from a very small one bedroom type rehearsal environment to playing Madison Square Garden on the Kiss tour.
Yeah.
And not many parents quite get to see quite that.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a mixture of archival footage, and it's more documentary than biopic, or is there any acting in
No,
it,
it's
or is it?
there's people that portray the younger versions,
Okay.
and watching some of that going down is interesting because you're like, pretty fucking close, like it's some of it is amazing. Some of the
Yeah.
people study early footage, and I'm like, look, dude, the guy's got every fucking move you've made. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just, it's like seeing that Queen thing.
Yeah.
That guy was so good, and they were all so good. I loved early Queen. So when I saw the early footage and Brian May kind of looking over, he's singing the wrong words. And then somebody else like, it doesn't matter. And with Freddie Mercury, it clearly in the end, it didn't matter. People loved him and he was one of a kind.
Mm.
And but there are incredible truisms to all those moments. And because of seeing some of those things, it's important to us to bring those funny moments out where a manager came in once to the studio and said, it's really too bad that Fly to the Angels doesn't have a chorus, guys. If it only had a chorus, it could be a big song. Flight of the Angels currently has about 44 million views on YouTube, unpromoted, very naturally. And every night we play it, people are crying, singing, and relishing. But that's the truth. Now, if you listen to that manager guy at the time, you could have taken it into a whole nother direction. And I looked over and I said, you know what's great about opinions? They don't really matter.
Now I
And he
said
just
for the,
stared at
sorry,
me.
sorry, Dan.
And he just stared at me like, I'm gonna fucking kill you. And I said, well, either you're gonna kill me or you're gonna be thankful I stuck to my guns.
Let's have a song.
And
What
many
song is
moments
that?
like that.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And that's in the film. I can't. Sounds like you're a long way down the track with the film. It's like there is a finished like cut. Is there? Like it's completed in a
All of
film.
the there's not a finished cut, but the story and the interweavings of the story have been worked on for a good while, and it's like a good movie. I mean, if you don't have a great story or a good song, if you don't have a good song, you could be the greatest band in the world, but people may not be able to hear you.
Mm.
So, it's that kind of thing. But the story I think is a really, really good
Ah,
story.
now, there's welcome back. Second part of interview with
Let me
Dana
call you
Strum
back.
from Slaughter. Want to thank him for his time. There's nothing worse than an interviewer talking about themselves, but I hope you find this a little bit interesting. I was recently in Lubbock, Texas, and I went to find the Municipal Coliseum, where the first show was on the Kiss tour, and I went there because I covered that show for Kerrang, believe it or not. So it was my first time back in Lubbock, and it's a park now. There's nothing there. They've knocked it down. It's just grass. And around that time was the last time I interviewed you, would have been in 1989, 1990. And I asked you a bunch of questions about Vinnie, and you were stunned that I wanted to know all these Vinnie questions when Slaughter were blowing up. But I'd actually interviewed Vinnie in Hollywood previously. The funny thing is, all these years later, you've done all these things and he's done nothing, and yet people are still fascinated with the guy. You know what I mean? Like it's quite an amazing thing, isn't it? That people are obsessed with people who burn bridges. They love it. You know what I mean? So, and you must have watched the events of the last couple of years, like with a fair bit of interest.
I'll be on. There's it's a funny subject. Mark and I obviously were involved in many tours with VVI, and we still talk to Bobby Rock. He's a great guy. We still talk to him, and we're actually all still friends. And we can sit around and reminisce about the crazy times on those tours. And there were some crazy moments for sure. I enjoy the records I worked on doing that, and some of them I thought, had really interesting moments, and I can go back and listen to them and think, you know, I feel like I was really onto something that then became a extension off of All System Go, where Slaughter later went a bit. Um, but what's funny is people have asked me, and I just tell the truth, like I've never spoken to him since we all saw each other leave at the Celebrity Theater in Anaheim, Santa Ana area when we left.
Mm.
And I thought, and I never really wanted to. And I didn't have really anything to say. It was just the whole thing was just so kind of twisted, one of those VBI songs, that it almost was better off just leaving it unsaid, but then I've seen, there's going to be a special concert here and there. And I always scratched my head and said, you know, okay, good luck.
Mm.
And it, is what it is. I think sometimes if you talk about somebody, you're garnering them publicity and awareness, and it may not be something that I'm interested in doing for him.
Okay, okay. So the one of the podcasts I listened to was Bobby Rock actually, and he was on the Full in Bloom podcast, and the host mentioned that you played the original bass tracks on Crazy Train, Suicide Solution, and one other Aussie song. Is that true at that period?
The release versions that you're hearing, that's not true.
Okay.
Uh, he heard some versions that I did,
Mm-hmm.
and because they were tapes that I had,
Mm.
but they released versions, no. Bob Daisley played those, and Lee Kerslake played the drums on those.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. Because the connection with Ozzy, you know, is obviously deep. It's very deep. I mean, at the moment, I guess we hoped that Ozzy was going to play a power trip, but he wasn't able to. You know, what are your thoughts on where Ozzy's at the moment, and what are your hopes for him?
Number one, he is actually a really funny guy,
Hmm.
and he has a lot of heart. And to see him have to say that he couldn't play, as a performer myself, and knowing an early guy in the early day when he was just canned from Black Sabbath, those are memories that if I close my eyes, I can relive every second of them, because I was a huge Black Sabbath fan, still am,
Mm,
still am.
mm,
Black Sabbath, the real version, either the Ozzy version or the Heaven and Hell record. So to me, that real period, Volume 4, Master of Reality, Paranoid, um, they could do no wrong for me at that time as a younger kid, and they can do no wrong for me now as I listen, because the magic of those guys playing in a room together, as primitive and as, four blokes from Birmingham
mm,
just doing whatever they could.
mm,
And I think you feel it and hear it in the music. And if somebody hasn't revisited that stuff, it's really worth revisiting. Snowblind or Tomorrow's Dream or Wheels of Confusion. I mean, they're like hard rock metal masterpieces. And if you really listen, there's no Pro Tools and there's no time correction. And it's just guys playing their hearts out. And, it's a fascinating thing, because if those guys didn't do what they did, so many acts would have never had the shape or the vibe or the music that they ever came up with. And these four guys were lucky enough to pave the way for so many of us.
mm.
So I am and was a huge fan. And when I met Ozzy, he was very down and out. That he's documented and talked about this. There's my side and his side, and they coincide, almost vertically the whole time. Um, and he had a lot of doubts if he was going to have an ongoing career. He says that out there too. I had no idea. And I did have an idea. And I told him, look, people love you. And he questioned that. Um, and a very funny episode that happened, I didn't know him well. My Black Sabbath sounding band was playing the Starwood. He came to the Starwood, and it's again well documented out there. And I didn't know much about him. I just loved the music. So at one point in the hotel, as we were talking, getting to know each other, um, I said, "So hey, what do you play?" And he kind of looked at me cross-eyed, and what do you mean? You know? And I said, "Well, I mean, do you play the bass or the guitar, or the drums, or?" And he says, I don't play anything, Dana." You know, and and I'm like, "Well, my name's Dana." "Yeah, I just fucking said your name, Dana." And I'm like, "All right, well, forget that." Um, but I said, "Well, how do you make that stuff up that you do?" And he says, and it was a really honest answer. And he says, "Well, it's just in my head." And so I'm a kid and I'm kind of awestruck. And I said, "Do it. Just do it." And he's like, "I'm not auditioning for you, Jenna." And I think he was like almost offended. And I said, "No, no, no. I'm just curious. Just do it for a minute. Just do it." And so he finally puts his finger in his ear and he's like, "I want," all I had to hear is 3, 4 notes. I said, "You can stop." He says, "Why is that?" I said, "No, you can stop. You are the guy that made that stuff up." And you could see him get very somber, like, "I am." And I'm like, "But you still are." He's like, "Well, they've sacked me and they have Ronnie Dio and they," and I said, but it doesn't matter. Believe me, it doesn't matter." And he's like, "I hope you're right." And I'm like, "Oh no, I'm right. Meanwhile, I want to tell you, I know this guy is going to change your life." And I had a guitar player in my mind that would just be this fit, because in Hollywood at the time, I was always shocked. No one really got Randy Rhoads. There was A&R people, talent scouts, booking agents, journalists, writers. No one ever said, "This guy is going to change the world." No one. And there was me in my band sitting at the top balcony saying, how does no one get this? This guy's so fucking good and so different. And it was, a really great lesson out there. If you think you're onto something and you believe in something, you got to see it all the way through.
Mm.
And there was no money, there was no business deal. Uh, it was just from my heart. And I just knew this guy had to have, the world had to see this. And once the world did start to see that, uh, I think Randy Rhoads changed the world of guitar for a lot of people. And I was always really proud. And then I was horrified at his death
Mm.
because the truth was he had never been on a plane before he went to England. A lot of people don't know that. He had never flown. And how does he die? In a plane crash.
Mm.
And of course, I'm thinking, oh my God, I tried to convince him to do this. And one of the funniest oddball moments was him telling me that he really didn't like Black Sabbath.
Mm.
And I'm like, well, we certainly don't want to tell him that.
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And but they didn't, and that's also documented out there. And I'm like, how can you play like that and not like Black Sabbath? I mean, be real. But he was so real that he gave me a bootleg cassette. And I said, what's this? He said, well, all the stuff that you like about me, it's right here. And I said, oh, is this like you guys playing live at the Starwood or the Whiskey? He says, no, no, no. Have you ever heard of David Bowie? And I said, yeah. You know his guitar player, Mick Ronson. Now I'm looking at Randy Rhoads with the frosted hair, the big hoop earrings, the polka dots on, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, he looks like Mick Ronson. And he goes, because everything that you like that I do, I took from this guy. And I'm like, not only was it honest, but it was, he is emulating his hero.
Yeah.
And if you look at an early picture of Randy with the polka dots and the cream Les Paul, and you look at Mick Ronson, you could put them next to each other.
Mm.
And I'm like, how did I miss this? I never even thought about what influences it was. But it was one of those things that things can be so obvious, but it was very endearing.
Mm.
And I was very proud of doing that. I was also proud of putting Jake together with him. Um, I love that music as a fan. I never made any money doing those things. I never asked for any money doing those things. It was the right thing to do. And I thought in my mind, I'll have my day. And whenever that comes, I'll try to make the most of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to ask you a couple of follow-up questions to that, but another song for the listeners.
How about Slaughter, Fly to the Angels, and we dedicate it to people that are no longer with
Okay.
us?
Welcome back. Third part of our interview with Dana Strum. I want to thank him for his time. Just on dedicated Flight of the Angels to people who are no longer with us. And I wanted to follow up what he said earlier about Randy Rhoads. And he actually said in the last part of the interview that he was horrified at what happened and the way things had played out. And I just wonder, how do you reconcile that? It's 4 decades ago. So, in your heart and your mind, how do you find sort of peace, after such a tragedy, and also the loss of Tim Kelly, I guess. I wrote that down as a question to ask in the last section because I thought maybe people benefit from, how you deal with tragedy like that.
The truth was I was driving down the street after I knew that I had put Randy and Ozzy together, and I remembered in my mind, of course, you always do, Randy's mother, who owned the music school that Randy taught at, Dolores Rhodes. She would religiously tell me, "Don't call here. He's in the middle of a lesson, and don't call her because he taught music lessons." And I said, "But no, I really need to talk to him because I've got a studio and he's going to come down and play for Ozzy Osbourne. He's in a lesson." Click. And I'm like, all right, I'll just pretend that that didn't happen and I'm going to call again. Calling here, and so all of the things go through your mind, the moments that lead up to something. And when the world accepted him so wholeheartedly, I was proud and thrilled. And I'm like, hey, I was right. The world did get him and the world needed him and the world embraced him and he changed how many young kids wanted to play guitar because of him. And then I was driving on Sunset Boulevard and heard on the radio, we just played Leonard Skinner Freebird. And that's dedicated to Randy Rhoads, who just passed away this morning in a tragic plane crash. And I pulled my crappy car over and just started crying. And I thought, in my mind at that moment, what the fuck did I do? He didn't really like Sabbath. I kind of pushed him. What if I never did that? He'd still be alive. All those thoughts race through your mind. And, I felt horrible for years until I did a documentary piece where a student of his became an award-winning writer and photojournalist. And he says, I was in the room when you called the front a number of times. So you're kidding. And he says, no, I was, and Rudy Sarzo was in the other room. I said, okay. He says, do you know his mom, Dolores, told him, that guy might be right. This might be your chance. You should go down there and do this. I always thought I was the one that really leaned on him. But apparently his mom looked at him and said, this may be the thing for you. And the guy might be right. As strong as he's coming on, he may be right. And I'm like, all right, that just took 50 of the 100 pounds off my shoulders.
Yeah.
So, I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know that I would ever let go of it, because if that exact timeline didn't occur, who knows? Ozzy may not have had the career that he had. Randy may not have been known all over the world as the inspiration that he was. I mean, if certain things don't line up, it's the same thing as Tim Kelly getting in that horrible accident. He left talking to the drummer and I Bloss like it was just another day. By the end of the day, he was dead.
Mm.
And if one little thing, if I kept him on the phone a little longer, or if I said, don't go there, come to the studio and work like you should. And if I, which I did say earlier in the day, you shouldn't be going there. But he, Dana, you're too serious all the time and you want to work, live a little bit.
Mm.
The guy dies that night.
Mm. Mm.
So, I mean, you don't really let go of it when you lower someone in the ground in a casket that you were on those tour buses with like that. And he went through the ups and the downs of people believing in the group, not believing in the group, loving the group, throwing darts at the group. He deserved the accolade. And what's worse yet, he deserved to see a bit of the comeback of the genre of music where it wasn't a crime to admit you liked it anymore.
Mm.
And he never got to see that. And so you think about that often when you play.
Yeah. I guess when we get older, we try to make sense of it, but it's really, you do what you got to, don't you? I mean, you got to do what you got to, you feel you got to, and if it comes from a good place, then that's it, isn't it?
You try to do the right thing, the
Yeah.
best that you can. And even after Jakey Lee was out of Ozzy's band, and I ran into him, and he was on the Monsters of Rock cruise, and he was standing by the speakers, and we were sound checking, and he says, I hear this voice, hey, don't stand up there, you might fall. And I kind of looked down like, who's saying this? you know, and he goes, hey, it's Jake Williams. And that was his real name.
Yeah.
And I'm like, look down, I'm like, son of a bitch, it's Jake. And it was just one of those moments.
Mm.
And you're like, here we are again.
Yeah.
And you just do what you do what you think is right. And it's a fairly small, incestuous world. And you do the best that you can. And most of the people that I've been involved with have done the best they can. It doesn't mean they're the greatest in the world. They've done the best they can. That's all we can all do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great way to finish. I was going to ask you about Vince. I guess I'll ask you what's happening with Vince, and have you got dates booked with Vince, and how does it, the crew tour sort of interfere with that or impact on that? It seems like a kind of superficial question after the last couple, but I'll ask anyway. So yeah.
We play Vince states, in and out of the radiuses that other tour can and can't play. Obviously, when crew is doing a huge tour, there are blocks on areas that you can perform in, and then it might not be viable. but the Vince dates are really great fun to play. It's great music. It's loose, cool. They do some early crew, and it's good fun. And
Mm.
underneath what anybody may or may not think, Vince Neil's a pretty good guy, and he's got a lot of heart. And it hurts me to see or hear people say things that are just ignorant and wrong. This guy's done it all of his life. He's lost a kid. He's been through hell and back, and you got to have a lot of respect for anybody that's been through what that guy's been through and still does what he does. And I mean, Vince is he's one of the good guys, and a lot of people, unfortunately, would maybe never know that, but
Yeah.
I know that.
Yeah, you've had such a massive impact on rock history, as you've discussed. And the thing I found interesting listening to all the podcasts on the way back is that a lot of people say stick to your lane, just do your thing, do this one thing you're good at, and you've only got one life, and you've got yourself involved in anything that interested you, really. Sometimes I guess you've risked being ripped off because there was no guarantee you were going to earn any money out of this, but you just got involved in stuff that interested you, and it's proven to be the right approach for you, hasn't it? It's given you a pretty good life.
It's given me a good life that I'm thankful for. I I love understanding the business, and I certainly in it today understand it a lot more than I did when I started. I would always tell people to understand the business that they're in. Sometimes, if I work with new talent, I ask them, "Do you know what a record deal actually is? It's a loan. It's a loan because someone believes in you, but it's an 85-15 loan, and you get 15 and they get 85. And that doesn't sound very good to me. So
Mm,
let's think of another way. And of course, sometimes you get someone that can listen because their dad had a big business. Other times we want to be on Warner Brothers records because
mm,
Van Halen was on Warner Brothers. And I'm like, but it's been a long time since that happened.
mm,
And it's tough. But look, I was born the son of a scientist. I think I was lucky that I had a brain and a mind through the DNA chain, and anything that's interested me, I've tried to go after, for better or for worse. Some things maybe a little worse, so, and
mm.
or it wouldn't be rock and roll. Some things a little better, but I'm still alive and I love what I do, and I hope people enjoy seeing us do it in Australia.